So hello and happy Friday. I'm glad you're here with me today. This is Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers episode number 128. And this is Friday, October the 1st. And right now it's really nice outside, so I hope you appreciate that I'm sitting here talking to you because I'd rather be out in the bee yard because everything is going on out there. It is 67 degrees Fahrenheit outside. That's in the shade though. See, out in the sun it's super nice. And that is 19 degrees Celsius for those of you who want to know that kind of stuff. And I'm Frederick Dunn, and this is The Way to Bee. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. If you want to know what we're going to talk about today, look down in the video description down below. Also, there's going to be a bunch of links down there. I'm going to try to get a standardized list of links so that it's the same thing over and over because I want to give a shout out, and I often forget. Things like Hives to Heroes. It's a national organization that helps veterans and gets them involved in beekeeping because it's just good for your soul to keep bees. So let's jump right in and get started here. Question number 1 comes from David in Olean, New York. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. You have mentioned in the past that you were treatment-free for a number of years. I have had bees all off and on for 6 years. I have 7 hives, 2 locations. I'm trying treatment-free in one. Could you talk about your time when treatment-free? You obviously stopped. So hearing some of the good and the bad would be very helpful. Thanks, that's true. So I thought, like a lot of people, I just wanted to be organic, I just wanted to raise my bees and not have to treat them with stuff. The whole reason I got involved in beekeeping in the first place is because I heard about something called colony collapse disorder. So, Silence of the Bees, all these documentaries were coming out. So, because I'm a photographer, because I'm a cinema guy, I volunteered my services to help document what was going on and take pictures of bee issues and things like that. So, I was interested in the well-being of the bees. And when it came to picking my own bee stock, and this is going into the fall of 2006 and into the winter of 2007 and spring of 2007 when I really started keeping bees, I wanted to find the stocks that didn't require treatment. And so I searched around and found a company called Bee Weaver. So they're breeders in the state of Texas, and they had survivor bees that they had not treated and continue not to treat for a long, long period of time. And I looked them up. I listened to what they had to say. I listened to seminars by their family members that went off to school and came back educated about bees and genetics and everything else. And they have treatment-free bees. So I started doing that myself too. And this is kind of a big mess recently because we all think that we would like to, as backyard beekeepers, that's my target group. We're not commercial beekeepers. We don't have thousands of beehives. So our ability to control our own genetics is not easy to do. And we just can't, to be honest. Every time we split a colony, every time we allow them to supersede a queen, every time we remove a queen and let them develop new queen cells from the existing eggs in your hive, we might know the traits of that existing colony. They're going to raise a queen. She's going to fly out. She's going to mate with some drone that we don't know anything about, 20 of them to be exact. So she's got the genetics of the potential for 20 different colonies of bees somewhere else. Then they come back. So if you've got 20 hives, 21, 2 hives, 5, 4, 3, can you, in a meaningful way, have your own genetic program? You really can. So what we do, and this is my end of it, I support the companies, the breeders, the beekeepers that are doing things large scale, and they have a consistent line of survivor stock. So then you hear things like VSH, Varroa resistant, you have hygienic stock, you have Varroa resistant stock. We have ankle biters, Purdue ankle biters. You've got mite maulers. You've got all these different names, and this is very confusing for brand new beekeepers. And maybe you're like me and you just want to be treatment free. But I found out, I was losing my colonies pretty predictably, 40% a year. So I had 8 colonies at the beginning. I started with 2, jumped to 8 right away, and then was treatment free. But let's be honest, I wasn't even counting the mites. If you're going to be treatment-free, I thought back then, why not just get good stock like the Bee Weaver queens, which do a great job of chomping on the Varroa themselves. They would qualify as ankle biters. Mite maulers, munching the mites, the Varroa destructor mite. Anyway, But they swarm and they split, and I end up with mixed genetics. And then we have bee drift and all the things I've learned since then. That's why I'm here now. I've learned through the years how to keep my bees and what the things are that impact the bees and keep them from surviving winter and so on. And so I decided just a few years ago. So for more than 10 years, I was treatment free. Let them die, work with the survivors. Let them die, work with the survivors. And then so it went. And I ended up with pretty much a static number of bees. But the eye-opening part was the fact that as a beekeeper, a backyard beekeeper, if I have varroa bombs, mite bombs, they're often referred to as, they're spreading out their diseases, their pathogens that are provided to those honeybees by the Varroa destructor mite, 11 different pathogens at any given time. And they're all landing on flowers out in the environment here. I live in a beautiful rural part of the state of Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of native pollinators out here. So then there was a study, University of Vermont. They were looking at the way managed honeybee colonies might be impacting native, in particular, bumblebees. And they were passing on one of the worst diseases that the varroa mites carry for your honeybees, and that was the deformed wing virus. And those were getting on there, and then I had an eye-opener there. The other thing is, I've been studying, taking courses at Cornell University, and if I said I wanted to be treatment-free and I wasn't going to treat for varroa mites and I had no mite control planning or system in place, and I wanted to be, let's say I wanted to be a master beekeeper, and I just want to be treatment-free and I don't want to treat any of the mites when they start showing up and I have a disease colony of bees, I'm just going to let them pan out. I'm going to be completely Darwinian. And if they don't make it, they don't make it. And then the ones over here, if they make it, they make it. And then I'll breed from them. But you know, that's very naive on my part. I would have failed my coursework at Cornell if I tried to stick to that. And the reason is because the more seasoned scientists, those who know what they're talking about for decades, understand that you have a couple of choices here. If you're going to be treatment-free, then when a colony of bees gets diseased, you have to kill it. You have to euthanize it. You have to get rid of it. You cannot let them in a responsible way. You can't keep them and just let them work it out on their own, knowing that they're just going to die. And in allowing them to die, you let them spread their disease everywhere because they drift. So the workers will go to other colonies and they spread their disease. So that's bad husbandry. And of course, I would have failed my coursework. So it made perfect sense after you listen to that and you see how things are going. Then we have world-renowned honeybee experts like Dr. Thomas Seeley who talk about the Darwinian beekeeping approach. But see, the same thing holds true if you're working with survivor stock and survivor bees and you're not going to treat, then you're going to have the chutzpah to get in there and kill off, euthanize, end them, keep them from spreading any colony that starts to show disease. So instead, I decided I would have, first of all, we have to account for the mites, because otherwise how would we know which of these colonies are doing well and which aren't? So the mites are at the top of every problem that most beekeepers encounter today, because they're the beginning of the disease, weakens the bees, shortens their life, affects reproduction of the queen, and so on, and it just keeps going. So the mites are at the top. And that's not all that your bees can get, but this is, I don't want to cloud the waters here with all that stuff. But that's why I don't do treatment-free beekeeping anymore. And that's because, number one, I would have flunked my coursework because it's irresponsible beekeeping is the way it's explained to me. And I have to say that I accept that would be true. So then a few years ago, I treated my bees for the first time with oxalic acid vaporization. I've learned a lot even since then, but that got all my colonies through the winter. That had never happened to me before. So simply by knocking back the number of mites in the colony, everything else kind of fell into place, because bees that are not suffering from an overload of Varroa destructor mites tend to be healthier overall, and then therefore can handle things like chalk brood, nosema, and all sac brood, and all these other things that can impact a colony but then the impact is much reduced because we've gotten rid of the number one thing that weakens the overall health and well-being of the individual bees and the superorganism as a whole, the colony of honeybees under our care. So that's in a nutshell why I'm not treatment free anymore. Now, I still have colonies that if their numbers are very low, but like a lot of things, it's a moving target for me. Because then I learned when we're talking to Randy Oliver and other people too. Randy Oliver lectured at Cornell as well. And we talk about, I ask the question, if I have a mite bomb over here and we treat them and a bunch of bees move out, in this case we were talking about Formic Pro, and when you put the Formic Pro strips in there, bees move out of that colony en masse on the front, but also some of the foragers in that hive spread out to other colonies. And I said, so now if we've got colonies over here that didn't require treatment, are we not just sending potentially diseased bees or mite-carrying bees to those colonies? And should we not then treat those colonies? What's the potential of drift around those? And he simply said that has not been studied. So now we keep the records of what the varroa mite levels are and what the overall health and well-being status is. This is why keeping records, even if you only have a couple of hives, 5 hives, 10 hives, keep records. We can't carry this information around in our heads effectively. As years pass, we look back and we discover trends, statistical, meaningful information. And so now if they require treatment, I treat the colonies and I also treat the adjacent colonies in the same apiary, and that's why my plan was to move sick bees or heavy bees that are loaded with mites or require treatment into another bee yard. So I did that. So that's what I'm doing, but now I'm not treatment free anymore. And that is, that's why. Because I wouldn't be able to be a master beekeeper. It'd be really sad. So anyway, and it all makes sense to me. So now I'm on board. You have two choices, treat or kill them. So now I keep them and I treat them and I treat the rest of the hives in the same micro apiary because there's too much exchange of genetics, diseases, and everything else going on hive to hive all over the place. Even hives that don't belong to me that might be less than a mile away, right across the road in some cases, their bees are going to ultimately potentially visit my hives and I have to help. But I do support treatment-free programs that have enough hives to make that effective, to control their genetics, to get that out there. So that's how I support that, because I believe in the long run, having bees that can handle these things on their own without treatment is the way to go. I just can't do that here in a tiny backyard apiary. I only have 21 colonies. So I can't have a breeding program. I can't do that on my own. So I bring in stock that's been proven. Question number 2, moving on. This comes from Jonathan Spicer. I have 11 honeybee hives and they are great. When this question got brought up, I recently had the same thing happen to me when I was making one of my queens. I have marked them all, but have only had this happen one time. I knew it was not me because I was extra gentle with her. It literally looked like she just rolled over and died. I gently put her back in the hive, and the next day she was fine. In the book, Queen Bee Biology, Rearing and Breeding by David Woodward on page 27, he mentions something called catalepsy. Just figured I would share it with you in case you have not heard of it. It was new to me at the time and I saw it in the book. Thanks for the great videos. Okay, so what we're talking about here is another person submitted a question when their honeybee fainted, their queen. They were handling the queen and the queen just died on them right there. And they made all these efforts, to resuscitate the queen. So the reason I'm going to bring this up right now is, first of all, it's an interesting sounding book, so I'll share that information. I've not read it. But the catalepsy issue, it's never happened to me. I pick up queens with my fingers and I put them in a one-handed queen catcher cage, and then I mark the queens, and that's how I track them. And so I handle a lot of queens. I've never had one pass out or go dormant like that. Catalepsy sounds like a good description to me. And so the reason I'm putting that out to you is if it should happen that you're doing something and your queen seems to just keel over and act like a possum queen. They look like they're dead. Don't do anything to it. Leave it in the hive. Leave it in contact with the nurse bees. See if it'll snap out of it, later on its own. Go ahead and finish, marking your queen or whatever you're doing. but leave her there in the hive where they can take care of her. There's nothing you can do. And the chances are very good that she just fainted. Some people say that that's a drama queen, they said. So, yeah, she just needs attention. And it's never happened to me, but I understand it's a thing. Your queen bee can faint. So put her back in the hive and let the nurse bees attend to her. Let her retinue, those with the responsibility to attend the queen, no matter what her attitude is on any given day. But I would not breed from that queen. That's probably something genetically that we want to get rid of. So we'll move on to number 3 here. Barry, Oakland, California. Last inspection 1 week ago, I didn't find my marked queen. Lots of capped brood, no queen cells. By the way, less than 1% mites. Cautious, the queen may not be there. So, do I split this hive now if no queen? So I'll take this piece by piece. You should not split a colony that has no evidence of the queen there, because making a split when you don't have eggs so that they can make a new queen would just be creating 2 weak colonies that both require requeening. So what is the best way to keep this hive from swarming? So again, in the absence of a queen, they wouldn't be capable of swarming. They wouldn't be inclined to swarm because they have no queen to follow. And I've done this in years past, where even when there's a cluster of bees, a swarm of bees that went out and collected in their bivouac location, and they're going to move out from there later into the new colony, if you can collect the queen out of that, the remainder of those bees there, in the absence of the queen, will return to the hive that they left. So they won't swarm without a queen, because there's nothing to stimulate them to swarm. Bees without a queen left in a hive, and they become queenless, and there's no brood, and there's no reproduction going on. What happens ultimately is that you potentially end up with laying workers, so their ovaries activate. The general rule of thumb is that it takes about 3 weeks for them to be absent from the queen, and then they start laying eggs that are haploid, and that means that they're only going to produce drones, male bees, in that hive. So they just attenuate. They live out their lives, they die, there's no reproduction other than to generate drones. Drones can't make more bees in there, and so they just dwindle and fade out. So, very mild winter here, brood almost year-round in the Bay Area. I have a queen to install, if advised. So yes, that's my advice. If you've got extra queens, resource queens around, based on the description of this colony, I would not split the colony, but I would restore them with a laying mated queen. Sounds like a good move. So this person, by the way, has 3 hives overall. That's why if you're a backyard beekeeper and you're starting out, 2 or 3 colonies, much better than just 1. Then you have resources. You can play the strong to support the weak and so on. And if you have just 1 hive and it dies out, you're out of beekeeping. You're starting over all the time. So question number 4 here. This comes from Rod Butler, Sydney, New South Wales. I have a flow hive with a slatted rack and a medium super that is filled to the rafters with honey after a fairly mild winter. I recently removed the queen excluder to give the bees uninterrupted access and put the flow frames back on for spring and summer harvest. See, in Australia, they're just getting into spring. How awesome is that? Well, it's getting cold for us. Problem is that bees are just not interested in going past the full medium super. I've had flow hives since their beginning, but this is the first year with a medium super setup. Should I remove a full medium super from above the brood box altogether, or place it on top of the flow frames, or just leave them alone? Now this happens sometimes because the configuration we're describing is a deep brood box that's full and productive. Then there's a medium super on top of that they've filled and gone chock-a-block wall to wall with honey stores. So they've created kind of a honey capsule there. And then he puts the flow super on, but just recently took the queen excluder off. So the bees, this is something that's kind of not guaranteed. But some people take that medium super off and they'll put it above the flow super, so it's called under-supering. So in other words, instead of taking your empty super and putting it on top of your whole hive, so this applies whether we're talking about flow hives, flow supers, it's a Langstroth design thing. So if you under-super, that means you put your empty frames under the full box of honey and above the brood box. That way they're already transiting through and the honey cap is raised up here. Now they have all this new space directly above them, kind of a good practice in spring because it gives the brood area a decongested move so that now they'll be less likely to swarm because they have space to store more honey resources and maybe even expand their brood up into that a little bit. So yeah, you could pull the full medium super that's full of honey, put that on top of your flow super, put the flow super directly on top of the brood box, but now you're going to have to leave that queen excluder in there because by putting your flow supers directly on that brood box, you run the risk of them running brood right up into your flow frames, and we don't want that. So just leaving them, now I would, you could leave it and hope, but now you risk swarming because they've used up all their space. And this is why when you're getting to the point in the spring, as they are in Australia, as they start to fill that super before it's chock-a-block. So when you have 7 or 8 of the 10 frames full of honey, that's the time to expand. Don't wait until they fill it solid because there seems to be a change in the way the bees manage their space once one of those supers is solid with honey and there's no space above it. So while they're filling and it's nearly full, that's the time to add your next super, or you can under super as described. So then the next question here, I recently opened a brood box on the hive again with a slatted rack just to have a look before placing a super on top for spring. I found a huge population of bees and lots of honey stores, but only about 50 to 100 scattered capped brood and no eggs and no larvae. There was one queen cell opened at the bottom in one of the 8 frames, but no queen or evidence of queen activity. Otherwise, the hive is very vibrant. I've got an odd feeling that I've caught things just in time, and I'm going out to buy another queen today just to put her in there. What are your thoughts? So if we've got a queen cell that's already open, queen cell, queen cup, we don't know, but we have to look inside those queen cells if there's no end on it to make sure there's no developing larva in there. If there isn't, if it's empty, because usually after a queen is hatched, the bees, the workers inside that colony, will dismantle that queen cell. So either she just recently hatched out, so you might want to give her some more time to see if there is a queen in there that's just a virgin, that's just hatched out. But you'll know for sure if you're bringing in a replacement queen. And Rod says here that going out to buy another queen today and just put her in there. What are your thoughts? So it sounds like since this was the 23rd, it's already going to and probably already has put the queen in there. So when you go to introduce your new queen, if you buy in a fertile laying queen and you put her cage in there and you see what the behavior is of that colony of bees, if they gather all around that cage, all over it, and they're starting to feed the queen and their reaction is to feed and care for her, then it's probably you've got a queenless colony. So, but if you've got a queen there, even though a virgin queen may have a weakened queen mandibular pheromone level, they still would respond negatively probably to the new queen that you're putting in. And that's when you see them doubling over their abdomen and trying to sting the queen that you're trying to introduce to the colony. So those are kind of tells early on when you put that replacement queen on what their behavior is, whether or not they need her, and whether or not there is a queen there somewhere. So I hope that Rod will post down in the comment section below this video and tell us what happened with that queen, because that's an interesting situation. But based on the description, if you couldn't find the virgin queen in there and you had only one queen cell and it's empty, I would tend to put in a laying queen because it's going to move you much ahead in your production in the spring, because we also have light brood in that colony, remember. So I think they've been queenless for a while. Next one comes from Orlando. In Norway, we use poly hives, poly covers, but we do not have choices. All bee equipment is Norwegian standard and sold by a single company for commercial beekeepers. We have rapid round feeders, but as you already know, they differ from batch to batch. The initial batch was good and had no dead bees in it, but the new ones are not good at all. The dimensions are wrong, and the texture on the cone is very poor. I noticed that you're using a sock on it to help with the problem. Does it really work and minimize the problem with drowned bees? How do the bees react to it? I tried it, but the bee space became very narrow and the bees just leak. And my bees just leak the sock. I think he means leach it or use capillary action on the sock. and take a very long time to get the feed into the hive. With 2-to-1 syrup, they do not get at any at all. It is too thick to soak the sock. Would you mind talking about your experience? So the cover shot of today's video, this is the Wrap It Around, and this is what Rolando's talking about. This is not the really good ones, by the way, that come out now have a sticker on the cover that say Apis. And I'd like to mention, because somebody out there might be watching or might know somebody, I don't know about the patent status of this Wrap It Around feeder. So many different companies are making them. There's a wide range of quality of the material. There's a wide range of specifications. So we know that some people that are making these don't know anything about bees, because this little clear cup that goes in here sits so low on that center cone because it's designed so that your bees come through the bottom. This sits on your inner cover, your insulated inner cover, whatever you have. The bees come up through here. They go over the top underneath this clear cone, because this is what prevents your bees from coming out over this entire surface. It's also what limits the surface area so that your bees down in the hive are not trying to dehydrate an entire pool of liquid syrup up here that's there for your bees. So with that out of the way, if it was all made right, and I'm going to link the video that I made a while ago that shows how we use these socks in here, and that gives them more footing, plus it soaks up the sugar syrup and gives the bees a place, and the bees do start to drink the sugar syrup right at the top, and they don't necessarily have to go all the way down. So we're going to talk about something else here too. I'm going to tell you about the socks I use first of all, because they're in the video, but these are just kids' socks. These are Hanes boys, it says, and they are, I wrote the size, 4.5 to 8.5 small. And they're 62% cotton, 36% polyester, 1% spandex, and 1% nylon. And the reason I tell you all of that is because some people are taking these socks, and what I do is I cut the ankles off of them, just like that. And this ankle piece is what goes over the central cone. So this will soak up your sugar syrup. But if you don't take this and wash it first, the way it comes from the factory, you could pour water on this and it won't even soak it up. So there's some resistance in the material to have a wetting ability. So the capillary action doesn't happen right away. So you have to wash this with soap, and then you have to give it a very good rinse, because this is going to be used in a beehive and your bees are going to drink from it. So once you've washed it and dried it and gotten whatever factory residue there is on these out, and one of the things you can use to wash your fabrics, this is not a sponsored plug, but this is also what people use on their bee suits. This is Tide, free and gentle. It leaves nothing, no dyes, nothing in it, and it will rinse clean, and then your bees won't be drinking some kind of detergent. So anyway, once it's all done and it's damp and clean, now it will soak up your sugar syrup. And as described here, the higher the concentration of sugar, like if it's a 2-to-1, which is, and let me get this right, 8 pounds, 16 pounds of sugar to a gallon of water, 8 pounds of water. That is a lot of sugar. The capillary action of that is not going to be good. So the lower the concentration of sugar, so more 1-to-1. 8 pounds of sugar, 8 pounds of water, then you would likely have that soak up here much easier. But the way we use it too is, this is just a single ankle sock here, and if you put that on there and then you put this cover on it, the bees can still get over the top of the sock and down to the syrup all the way to the bottom. That leads us to the second problem where bees drown. They get to the bottom of some of these, and when there's a bunch of bees pushing in there, this is a very lightweight piece of plastic. The bees tend to push out underneath of it, go out into the free surface area of your syrup when it's low, and then they drown out there, or they can't get back into the hive. So here's another note for people that are using these Wrap It Around feeders, putting socks on them. Put 2 of these ankle pieces, one over the other right here, and then if you look at that, see how thick it is at the bottom. Now when you put your cover on, your bees that go down through the clear area, they cannot, even once the syrup is out of it, they can't get out underneath and out into this area where you might find a bunch of dead bees. So 2 ankle pieces. And here's something else that I did that was pretty funny too, because you know what? I just like to see what bees do. So I take the toe end, because we have all these toes that are left over because we cut just the ankle part and put that on there. But somebody else told me there's a lot of people on YouTube that like to see a video or hear you say something and then they'll make a one-line comment. Somebody that never commented before. And they said when I did something like this and I put the toe end of the sock over that center column, what's going to happen? No bees can get up here. And this is for your thinner syrups, like your 1-to-1s, right? So now I don't even have to put this on here because your bees have no access in. So from the underside, and yeah, this has been used, and yeah, it's dirty, the bees get up in here and the capillary action draws all the syrup up, the lighter syrups, into the toe part, and the bees will be all over this surface on the other side of it with their tongues in the fabric, soaking up the syrup from in here with capillary action. Somebody else looked at that and said, when you do that, that syrup is just going to run out of that toe and down into the hive and drown and kill all your bees. So I tested that because I like to find things out. I don't like to just tell people that they're full of hooey. I like to look and say, well, is that even possible? Because that's the whole point of capillary action. It would hold the syrup in this fabric and then the bees would feed on that. And that's exactly what they did. They just get up in there and use their tongues and get the syrup out of it. Now, this was not a long-term method, but it does keep 100% of your bees out of the syrup and not one dead bee. But guess what the bees did when the syrup dried up and I wasn't feeding them anymore? They propolised the entire interior surface of the sock. I've got that sock somewhere. I should have brought that and shown you that. But there's a lot of testing and fun to be had in figuring out, number one, how to get the syrup to your bees and how to keep them from getting drowned in the process, because that's the point. We want to feed them. We don't want to kill them. But that's my explanation about the socks, the ankles. Watch the material composition. So the reason I read off the composition of these socks, the higher the cotton content, the more absorbent it is. But of course, as a sock, it would have no elasticity to it if it was just 100% cotton sock, really. So that's why they add in the 36% polyester, the 1% spandex, and the nylon and all that to make that sock form fit to your tiny kids' feet. So that works, though. And I'll have a link to my other study that showed those socks working as a way to keep your bees out. So keep the feeders full, limit the space, and give them good footing. And you can put the toe over it. Let me know how that goes. But of course, they don't get a lot of feed in a short amount of time. It forces them to slow down and take the feed in a measured way. So this is question number 6 from Nurse Steve. I'm in San Antonio, Texas. Winters here are typically mild, although this past February there was quite a disastrous snowfall. A once-in-a-lifetime event here. What, if anything, should I be doing for my hive to insulate the hive or ensure that they have sufficient resources? Candy boards, pollen patties? What do you recommend? So first of all, I'm going to recommend another YouTube channel. That's right, Dan Skis Bees. Why? Because he's in Texas. These are questions that are really good for your fellowship of beekeepers in the state, in the climate zone where you live. So that would be good. But here's what I hear about. First of all, I don't put pollen patties and things like that in my hives. So if anything, people would put winter patties on. If your bees have food and resources, if they have stored honey, that is the number one thing, the carbohydrate that's going to help them get through winter and generate the warmth necessary to protect the brood. And of course, they need pollen and everything else. But these pollen patties, so I'm told, down in southern areas, if the bees don't use them, guess what does? Small hive beetles. So you got to be careful about putting stuff on that the bees don't need that will then just sit in the hive ignored, and the bees are not good at removing it from the hive. So I'm hesitant to recommend pollen patties. So you've got enough time, hopefully, to have them store enough honey to get them through a winter down there. And that's where the other beekeepers in your area will let you know 40 pounds wasn't enough. 40 pounds is too much. 30 pounds will get them through. So one medium super chock-a-block with honey should get a full brood box of bees through winter down there. but Dan Ski will know, I would ask him. He's also one of the moderators at the Way to Bee Fellowship on Facebook. So he's a good guy, knows his bees, and can help you out down there. So the other thing is, rather than pollen patties, consider winter patties because they're a little different. They also have a high sugar content. They're solid, so we're not feeding syrup once things get really cold. And make sure that you've got a feeder shim so that you can put that on there. Some people just like to put the mountain camp method. That is putting a layer of newsprint. You can buy newsprint, by the way, that doesn't have any newsprint on it. It's just the paper. And you poke little holes in that. You put that, and this is why I say you have to have a feeder shim. Now, this is not a feeder shim, but this shows how thick it could be. You can make a little 1 inch or 1.5 inch little rim that goes between the boxes. So here's your brood box. Here's your medium super. This would sit on top of that, and then your cover goes on top of that, and this creates a space so that you can put newsprint down and pour your mountain camp sugar, which is just a fancy word for putting dry sugar on top of the newsprint and letting the bees chew their way up into it as winter progresses, and they'll have emergency rations there. So I would prefer that over putting in pollen patties and things like that. We're backyard beekeepers, just trying to keep our bees going. We're not trying to boost them and get ready for high production stuff. But candy boards, it's another thing. All a candy board is a space so that you can put your feed on there so the bees can get to it directly over that winter cluster, because as they cluster together, now that the temps are below 60, they're going to cluster together, and then hopefully the resources are above them, and they're going to migrate slowly through the winter up to the top. And then if they get to the top and consume all their resources, that's where your emergency resource comes in. And also those spaces that you put up there, because it's winter and it's cold, we don't have to worry about them building a bunch of burr honeycomb up in there, because they don't do a lot of comb production when the temps get too cold for it. See, so that's a winter feeder shim that you put up there, and then you put your dry sugar, whatever. That's what I use the rapid rounds for in the wintertime. So glad we're talking about this. We would pull this cone out because we're not putting liquid here anymore. So in the wintertime, all I do is pour a whole 4-pound bag of cane sugar right in this area, and then I just put this cover over it. And now the bees can come up through the central column right over the top here and out over this dry sugar. And then they use the condensation that forms inside the hive in winter. They need water inside the hive in winter. Where they don't need it is directly over the cluster, where it would drip straight down on the bees. So we want this condensation, this dew point, to occur on the interior surface of the hive on the sidewalls. And then your water bees get in there, they get water, they fill their little crop, and then they go inside, they go up here, they go over the top and into the sugar, and then they use that water to help metabolize the sugar that's down here. It's a win-win. And then your dry sugar turns into a sugar block anyway, because the condensation builds up, it solidifies it, and turns it into its own candy board for your bees. So that's that. Let's move on to question number 7. Keith Barton. Just a quick update on my laying worker, Nuke. Nuke is short for nucleus colony. Usually they're 5 frames, and that's how you start your bees. That was from episode 125. After adding 2 frames of open brood and eggs, the Nuke formed a queen cell. And I spotted the virgin on the weekend. She may have just been mated or may still be yet to mate. We'll check again in a week or so, so a little patience and a couple of frames of brood from a donor hive, and the laying workers were suppressed enough to raise a new queen. Happy with that result and keen to see how the new queen works out. She came from a very good-looking cell that was loaded with jelly. So that's good news. So this falls back on, don't just start with 1 colony of bees. Get 2 or 3. That way if one of them is falling a little bit behind, or this one ends up queenless, you can pull a frame of brood with eggs in it, and you can put that right over there and let them use those eggs to create their own queen cell, to create their own queen, and then they're right again. So now then you'll have 2 colonies. So having resources to work on bees that are falling a little bit behind can only happen if you've got multiple colonies of bees in your yard. So that's pretty good. And moving right on to question number 8. Nice update there. This is from Dude on YouTube. After JC's bees getting hacked on camera scam last week, Now for the comments. Do not answer any comment. There's lots of cautionary information here. But I do want to mention JC's Bees. He is an Ohio beekeeper. He has a YouTube channel called JC's Bees. And his YouTube channel got hacked. And they took it over. And he had no access to any of his Google related information. So even his Gmail was hacked and beyond his reach. And they changed his passwords and passcodes and sign-ons. So he's a channel, he was in a panic, rightly so. I mean, you spend years developing a YouTube channel, you put all your videos up there, and somebody hacks you. But here's what I want to clear up, and that's why I went and watched it after I got this communication. I thought, well, what happened to JC's Bees? Jason Christensen. He sounds like Tom Bodett from Motel 6. You know, they say, we'll leave the light on for you. You know, it's an American thing. So anyway, he got hacked. He lost his channel. The good news is he got his channel back. So that's why I didn't put the word out and tell everybody to go subscribe to his new channel, help him out, and things like that. He got his channel back. He's sitting good. He's got over 45,000 subscribers, and he's back in business with YouTube. Everything is good. So thank goodness Google was able to help him out with that. But what I want to talk about is, this is borderline related to beekeeping, but really it's just a cautionary tale. He got an email through Gmail that somebody was offering him a brand new camera for $2,000 to evaluate their camera. So he actually downloaded stuff that required him to be able to look at their camera catalog online. So he installed something on his computer and then he got hacked. So the cautionary tale is, I don't open any links from anybody that are offering me a piece of camera equipment or anything else. It requires a download and I have to install something on my computer to see their catalog and things like that. Don't do it. You're giving somebody access to your computer. So I would never do that. I have a son in cybersecurity. I have people that I know that do these things for a living. And if anything in an email is ever suspicious, don't open links in the email. Instead, get out of there. Do a Google search, go to the channel, look up scams, by the way. See if anybody is scamming under this name, because these could be known scammers. Do your checks and don't get all excited because somebody's offering you something for free. I dump free offers 10 to 20 times a day. My emails are full of them. Usually Chinese companies wanting you to get something for free and write a review or something like that. I don't do that stuff. So, beekeeping stuff from real people that do real research. Leave your email, Google, check them out, find out what's going on. Don't download anything from inside an email. Terrifying moment there for JC. I'm glad Jason Christensen is back in business with his YouTube channel. So go over there and say hey to him. Check out one of his bee videos. See what's going on. Question number 9. Beginner. I have a question about a BeeSmart insulated inner cover. I hope you can help me with this. I have 8 frame sized hives. When trying out the insulated inner cover on some extra medium Hoover hives, I have 8 frame size to check out how this would work. I can't fit the medium 8 frame Hoover box over the insulated cover. The intention is for it to fit over the insulated inner cover to act as a feeder shim. It won't fit. There are lots of gaps. I would appreciate your advice. Okay, so here's the thing. This BeeSmart inner insulated cover, which I have here, of course, and we've talked about this before. This thing is new. It is available on betterbee.com, insulated inner cover. So here's the thing. The way it's made is, it is for a 10 frame or an 8 frame hive box. That means it will sit on the 10 or the 8 frame box and function as an insulated inner cover with a feeder hole through the middle so you can put your rapid round or your feeder shim or whatever you want on there. Or they include this little black cap which goes on here and closes that off. And then I put an insulated Beemax cover over the top of it. So the thing is, if you take an 8 frame box and you go to set that on top of here, it's not going to match up here. It's going to be too narrow. That's where you're going to have all these gaps. So you can put a medium 10 frame feeder shim on top of this if you want the space for your rapid round or something like that, and then have the bottom sitting on the 8-frame boxes underneath. So you're going to have to get a 10-frame size feeder shim for the top, or a shallow super, because supers come, that's for your honey supers, they come in shallow, medium, and deep. So the shallow supers make really good feeder shims, and you can put that right on here, and then you put another cover over the top of that, and I recommend an insulated cover over the top of that. Bee Smart Designs also makes their ultimate hive cover, which is white, and it matches the contours and everything of this perfectly because they're designed to go together. But if you're going to put this on an 8-frame hive configuration, you cannot put an 8-frame box on top of it. You have to put a full-size 10-frame cover on it, or you have to put a 10-frame feeder shim, which would be a shallow super, as I said, and then you need a 10-frame cover for your 8-frame hive. There's no shortcut for that. So that's why it doesn't fit, and I believe that's in all of their literature too. If you go to Better Bee and read the description, what goes on top will have to be a 10-frame cover. And Bee Smart Designs doesn't make a 8-frame ultimate hive cover. It all goes on a 10-frame box. And that's the thing too, I use those Beemax polystyrene covers that I sit on top of my hives. I only get the 10-frame size because then you just have an extra large drip edge that goes out over the size of 8-frame boxes. But I will say this, that going forward into the future, I'm not going to be using any 8-frame equipment anymore. I'm just not. I've done my testing, I've done my observations. 8-frame hives make it through winter just fine. The 10 frames do, of course, as well. But I'm so frustrated because I'll go out there and I need to swap out some hardware on a hive, and what happens is it's an 8-frame and I only have 10-frame equipment, or it's a 10-frame and I brought some 8-frame landing boards and things like that. So now I want to do one thing, so I just want 10-frame hives everywhere. So for you that are not keeping bees yet and you're thinking about the equipment you're going to have, please kind of make a decision early on whether you're going to go 8-frame or you're going to go 10-frame. I would say between the two, go 10-frame, because there is equipment out there that's only available for 10-frame hives. There isn't equipment out there that's only available for 8-frame hives. So if you go 10, you got more compatibility with the equipment. So that insulated inner cover is just one of the many issues you'll run into potentially when you have 8-frame hives. Question number 10, Herman from Port Huron. I searched around the web attempting to get specific answers regarding proper filters for respirator masks when utilizing oxalic acid vaporization. And for the few months I've been following you on YouTube via Apple TV, I do not remember you addressing this issue either. The only specific answer I have so far is following the which do I use. So I did a video on oxalic acid vaporization and talked about the Pro Vape, and also it shows really interesting video sequences of what's going on inside the hive when you do introduce oxalic acid vapor. So when you're putting the OAV into a hive, what the bee's reaction is in that video. So I'm going to put that down in the video description, but I'm going to answer this question as a standalone. I keep these handy. These are by 3M, and this is if you're doing oxalic acid vaporization, you absolutely have to have respiratory protection. And it has to be the kind that is suited to the sublimation that you're going to be doing with your oxalic acid. So this is 3M, and here's the number, 60923. It's 3M 60923 Organic Vapor Slant Acid Gas Cartridge P100 filter. Now here's the other thing. This is only going to work with masks that, by the way, fit you well. If you're one of these people that has a huge beard, then you're going to have a hard time getting an airtight fit on your respirator mask. It needs to fit snug. It needs to keep the vapors from leaching around the outside. So you need the 3M 6000 or 7000 series face pieces only. That's for these. Now there may be other things out there, but these are what I recommend. These are what work, and these are what is safe for you when you're doing oxalic acid vaporization. Don't play games with that stuff. Don't do that thing where you put I don't often tell people absolutely don't do this, absolutely do that, because that's lame. We give people options, we give you information, and you make your own decisions. But when it comes to your health and well-being, please do not use oxalic acid vaporization without respiratory protection for everyone that's working the hives while you're doing that. And some people like to put their smoker out there, and then whatever direction the smoke is going, they stand upwind and they feel safe from the vaporization. You can get a pushback, your lid can pop off, you can pull out your OAV and the crystals may not be completely consumed yet. You can get a puff of that, you breathe that in. It is very bad for your health. It's one of the reasons some people won't use oxalic acid vaporization at all, and that's because of the health risks to people. So, food for thought. That is definitely the one. I don't mention it often because they are listed on the videos where I talk about oxalic acid vaporization. I put it in the video description. But for those of you who want to know that, 3M 60923 for the packs. And then, of course, that works for the 6,000 or 7,000 series face masks. Get a test fit. Make sure when people are in the military, they get fit tested for all of their protective equipment like that, gas masks and things like that. So to show you how effective they really are. And next question, number 11, Brian Benham. Can you go into more detail on how you use your resource hive to help build up weak hives? Mainly, I'm curious on how you introduce a brood frame to a new colony. I've heard to combine two colonies, you need to separate them with newspaper so they get used to each other and as they eat through the paper. But just adding a frame to a colony with no way to allow them to get used to each other, how does that work? Do you remove all the nurse bees and just add the frame with only the brood and hope the new colony has enough nurse bees to care for the new frame? Yes. So that's actually the easiest way to do it. You can fortify them with brood and nurse bees. And here's the thing, when a colony is queenless, if you just took a queen by herself and dropped her in there, you could have trouble. They could reject the queen, attack her, kill her, sting her, and everything else. That includes when you have laying workers. But when you bring in an overwhelming change in the hive, you've pulled frames out to make room for them, and then you're going to put in a couple of frames of capped brood with nurse bees on them. They don't consider nurse bees to be a huge threat, so that can work. But if the numbers are there to take care of the brood, then the best move is, of course, to shake the bees off of that brood frame, put capped brood in the colony that needs the numbers reinforced, and then they're going to hatch out. Also, they don't require any of the colony's resources to take care of the capped brood except providing them with the warmth necessary. So they'll hatch out, and then you've got nurse bees to replace and reinforce the numbers that you already have. So you can do two, and I've done both. I've taken a queenless colony, and I've taken 2 frames of brood with a queen on them from the nucleus colonies that I use as resource hives to fortify those that I have. And so when they were queenless, I took 2 frames of brood, nurse bees, and the queen, and slid them right into the hive, and there was no resistance to that introduction at all, and they carried on and went on about their business just like they had always been there. So when you have this big boost of pheromone coming in, laying workers tend to back down pretty easily. So, but if you have the numbers of the bees, the best introduction, of course, is to leave the colony that you're pulling them from with their numbers intact, shake off the nurse bees, and just put the frame of capped brood right in there with them. And hopefully there'll be some other resources with that too, like pollen and things that are stored for the good of those bees. Number 12, Hugo Jackson, Victoria, British Columbia. Why is 1-to-1 syrup at all? Why use it? It appears that 2-to-1 syrup has the advantage of being able to be stored by the bees in drawn out comb immediately, whereas 1-to-1 needs to be dehydrated by the bees. Here it is, fall, and I have a couple of hives that need more capped honey, but I do not have drawn out comb. Do the bees have trouble making beeswax from 2-to-1 syrup? And do I have to start them on 1-to-1 to draw the comb and then switch to 2-to-1 for them to quickly store honey? If it doesn't really matter, why ever use 1-to-1 syrup? Okay, so there's a couple of things going on here, and I'm going to throw some monkey wrenches all over the place. Here's why. We really get caught up in the exact composition of our 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 sugar syrup. I make reference to it all the time, and probably lending to that problem. But here's the thing. At the end of the year, it's not the sugar syrup resource that starts to slow their production of wax. Drawing out new frames and new comb and everything else this time of year is almost a non-starter. The bees need warmth and the resources in order to draw out new honeycomb inside your beehive. So when things are cooling down as they are now, it's only in the 60s today. It drops into the high 30s at night, low 40s. Too cold for the bees to be generating enough heat that they would need to make new beeswax comb inside the hive. That's where we get into a pickle now, because at the end of the year, if you've got something where you have to pull some frames out and you have to replace them and you're only putting in foundation, you can't expect those bees, even with sugar syrup available, which, by the way, we're running out of time on sugar syrup if that's what you're using too. As things get colder, we don't want liquids being introduced into your hive. They're not going to build beeswax, whether it's 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, because it's the season and it's the cooler temps that slow and reduce or even stop their production of new wax, burr comb, and everything else. It's also why we want to get into, if you're going to change the configurations of your hives, if you're pulling supers, if you're changing inner covers, if you're doing all of these things, you want to do that as early as possible, because the bees also need to be able to propolize and seal up those joints. And again, as things cool down, their ability and the warmth is not there for them to go ahead and propolize and seal things up inside the hive. So you would use something like better comb or stored drawn out frames. But if you don't have any drawn out frames and you have to expand a hive this time of year, you have to provide them with fully drawn out cells, because the 2-to-1 sugar syrup is not going to stimulate them because we're missing the temperature parameters that are required for them to do a meaningful production of infrastructure at this time of year. So then that takes us back to the other part. And the only reason that we go to 2-to-1 syrup in the fall is because it's, as cited here, they don't have to dehydrate it down. So it's a sugar resource in the absence of other sugars. Just like when they bring in pollen and they start storing pollen, field bees go out, they collect the pollen from the anthers of the flowers, and they bring it back on their hind legs. And the field bees, it's one of those things where the field bees, the foragers, actually go to the cell, they get all itchy and scratch off the pollen balls from their hind legs, and they drop them inside the cells. And then the bees inside the hive go in there, and now they mix it with their mandibular material. They mix it with a little bit of nectar, and they push those pollen balls in, and that's when it starts to look shiny, because it's been worked by the bees and it's going into fermentation. That's why you can smell bee bread in the hive. That's why hives with a lot of pollen in them smell funny. It smells like something's cooking. But the bees, and the reason I bring this up, bees like to use what's been brought in fresh before they use the stuff that's been around for a while. So when you're feeding them sugar syrup, 1-to-1 all the way up to 2-to-1. 2-to-1, very hard to make, by the way. So just because you have to heat it up a lot, it's a lot of sugar and a small amount of water, and it gets very close to the actual consistency of honey. So then the bees like to use what's coming in now as ready consumption. So if we put in, even this time of year, if it's still nice and warm wherever you live and you just want to boost them, really boost them on rainy days and days when they can't forage and in periods of dearth, and it can keep their numbers up and keep production up because it gives them the carbohydrates they need and it's fresh and new, and they use the new stuff first. 48-hour pollen that's stored, that's fermenting. 48 hours to up to 5 days, they're going to use that first. If you have 10-day-old pollen, it's going to be ignored if you have new stuff coming through the door, and within 48 hours it's being worked up. They're going to go after that first. So the same thing with the sugar syrup that you're bringing in there. They could ignore it. You know, the sugar syrup, this gets recycled all the time. If they need it, they use it. If they don't need it, they won't use it. They won't care about it. And the largest colonies that need it the least consume the most. It's very interesting. But if you get, they'll consume it at night. If it's a warm night, if it's a cold night, they're clustering, so they're not consuming it. You get these warm days, and if you're in a dearth, they're going to use your sugar syrup then. So, and your hive's going to gain weight because even the bees are carrying the sugar syrup around in their crops. So the bees have added weight to their physical bodies, and the material ultimately can end up in your honey supers. That's why it's an ethical decision about whether or not, if you still haven't pulled your honey supers off, you should not be feeding sugar syrup, because that's not coming from flowers anymore, and that's not what your honey is going to be based on. You don't want your honey to be based on sugar syrup. So it's really a matter of, why 2 to 1? Well, because they're going to dehydrate it less, and there's less effort and more gain. So if you put out, I've done these tests over the years where I put out different feeders of all the different sugar levels. What a waste of time that was. Big surprise, we did really light sugar syrup, and then we did really heavy sugar syrup, which is the 2 to 1 is about the heaviest I've ever made. So all the increments in between, what would the bees go for? And this test was conducted in the springtime. So they all converged on the heavy syrup first. So the highest sugar content, whether this is a flower in the field or some artificial source that you're offering, they go after the heaviest sugar content first. And your honeybees can handle that. Like a hummingbird can't drink 2 to 1 sugar nectar. They just can't. They can't handle it. So then the bees went through that, but did they consume, was any of it left untouched? No. They went after the highest sugar concentrations first. They went to the next highest sugar concentration, and then they go all the way down to the end, which is basically a very light sugar water, and then they consumed all of that. So they would take any sugar nectar resource. The foragers are just after it. So whatever gives them the most bang for their buck, why do you think they rob other beehives? Because it's 100% honey, requires no further processing. They bring that back and put that straight into their honey stores, into their their supers, right into the frames, right into the cells. But so they're after the highest sugar concentrations. It costs you more to feed them. Obviously, the more sugar, the more you expend. And that's pretty much it. But I do want to talk about something. We're talking about sugar because you're going to hear a lot of discussion. I have to talk to you about this because you're backyard beekeepers, and you can really get bogged down into the very specifics about exactly how much sugar syrup. When things get really cold, no syrup of any kind, no liquids. Just stop feeding them. It starts freezing at night, consistently below 50 degrees, it's time to back off. You should not be putting sugars in there. So if you absolutely have to give something to a colony that has absolutely nothing, you can do things like ProSweet. ProSweet is made by Mann Lake. Now, I don't necessarily, I'm not a super big fan of that, but I know that some people like to feed something to their bees, and this is where we get all bogged down in the inverse sugars. Sucrose converted to glucose and fructose, so that now it can be metabolized by the bees. And then there's these recipes, and people are boiling sugar water to create inverse sugars, to invert that sugar to save the bees that step. And here's what I want to say to you as backyard beekeepers, potentially beginning beekeepers: don't do that. Absolutely don't do it. And here's why. You run the risk of poisoning your bees. That's right, just by boiling your sugar water. So if you overheat your sugar water, or if you do things wrong and you're trying to cook it just to save the bees from having to invert their own sugars, you potentially risk damaging your bees. Why even do it? Give them sugar syrup straight up, warm the water, mix the sugar syrup, and then feed it to them as syrup up until things are too cold. After that, I just give them dry sugar. Why play games with boiling and risking creating toxins in the sugar that can hurt your bees? These are not critical numbers. But for those of you who don't understand what I just talked about, I'm going to give you a scientific reference. I'm also going to put it down in the link in the video description, but look up Apidology 2020. These are the numbers. 51:594-608. Those are the possible side effects of sugar on your bees when you have boiled it and created inverse sugar. So be very careful about that. And I'll put that link below and you can read about it, but I always recommend, unless you're some kind of chef and you know all the parameters and you're going to keep that and you're going to accept the risk and you're just saving them that step, bees are perfectly fine inverting the sugar on their own. That's what they do anyway. That's what they're getting from flowers. They're getting sucrose and they're converting it themselves. Let them do that right inside the hive. So, and in the springtime, we just feed them light sugar syrup, that 1 to 1. And that helps them because it'll help the colony sustain themselves during extended periods of rain and things like that. So we're providing a light nectar. I mean, for Pete's sakes, when they fly out into a flower, even the flowers, the same species of plant in the morning will have a different sucrose level in their nectar than they will the same flower in the afternoon when things have dried out. So these variations occur in nature for the bees all the time, and the bees are hunting that strongest nectar source that has the highest sugar content. It's really that simple. So you can't mess it up. I mean, we say 1-to-1 by weight, by volume, 2-to-1 by weight, by volume, which I always mess up, the 2-to-1. Because that's a huge amount of sugar, by the way. It's a huge investment. And you got to consider whether or not they really need that or not. And when things get cold, don't feed liquid. So that was the last question. Now we're in the fluff part here. And I got an email. And this is from the inventor of the Bee Smart Design stuff. So this insulated inner cover, and they like what I'm saying about it. And anyway, there's also the Ultimate Hive outer cover. So I'm told to tell you guys that at betterbee.com, by the way, I get nothing for this, 0. This is Better Bee, where I do a lot of shopping. But anyway, this is for sale there. And it's called the Duo. That means the Ultimate Hive cover comes with it. These are designed for 10 frame, but this will sit on an 8 frame as we described before. But it says if you mention Frederick Dunn when you order your Duo, you get a free gift. So I'm passing it on to you. So that's it for today. And I did go out and look at what the pollinators are on in my neighborhood. So we're going to watch that at the very end here. So right now, I'm just going to thank you for being here today, and thank you for those who submitted questions. And please write your own questions down in the comment section below, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend and that your bees are doing great. Thanks for watching.